This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Baruch Haba. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'd like to welcome all of our Torah Anytime viewers. This week's shir is being sponsored by my parents, my father and mother. And just like to say that when I was a young child, I had the opportunity to travel with my father to many cities across the United States of America to watch him lecture on behalf of Kiruv Rechokim. And to a large part, that has given me the ability and the confidence and the desire to do what I'm doing. So, and for my mother, to paraphrase the Gemara says that I believe Rava said the meat and the wine that his mother gave him when he was young stands up for him until this day. So all the care that my mother gave me in my youth is omeid for me ad hayom hazeh. So I'd like to be mevarich my parents, they should have arichas yomim and gesund and parnasa berevach and nachas ad bias goyel tzedek. Amen. Okay, so we have a very interesting topic this evening. The topic of Lifnei Iver lo yisitein milchshal, causing the blind to stumble. The Torah tells us in Parshas Kedoshim, lo yisekalel cheresh, do not curse the deaf. Right? Even though the guy is deaf, he can't hear a word you're saying, you still should not curse him. V'lifnei Iver lo yisitein milchshal, do not place a stumbling block before a blind man. V'yaresa me'alokecha ani Hashem. Fear God, fear Hashem, I am Hashem. That's what the pasuk says. Do not put a stumbling block before the blind. Okay? And we already conjure up in our mind, this old nebuch, this blind guy's walking down the road and you're hiding in the bushes and you just finished eating your banana and you want to throw the banana peel in front of him and, cause him to, break his leg. Torah says don't do that. And yet if you look in Rashi says that this pasuk is not speaking about that at all. What is this pasuk talking about? Says Rashi, this pasuk is talking about don't give your friend bad advice. Your friend is asking you for financial advice, and you know that, the real estate market is about to crash, so don't advise him to go buy a house now, when, tomorrow, houses are going to go down. Okay. But, however, let's think about the following scenario. What would be if, in fact, you're walking down the street, and there's a blind person walking down the road, and you took a little tree stump, and you put it in front of him, would you also violate the lav of Lifnei Iver lo yisitein milchshal? In other words, what Rashi is telling us is that this lav is specifically referring to giving someone bad advice. But what about the simple meaning of the pasuk? Let's say you actually violate this pasuk on the simple level, where you see a blind person and you cause him to stumble. And the Minchas Chinuch's opinion is that if you would ask the Rambam this question, the Rambam would say no. If you see a blind person walking down the road and you threw your banana peel and he slipped, it's not a nice thing to do. Maybe you're violating v'yahavta l'reacha kamaycha, but nevertheless, you're not violating the lav of Lifnei Iver lo yisitein milchshal. Because Lifnei Iver lo yisitein milchshal is only referring to giving somebody bad advice. And the question that the Minchas Chinuch raises is, we have a concept, we have a principle, ein mikra yotzi midei pshutai. Whatever drashos, whatever hints, whatever ramazim the Torah is saying, but the simple interpretation always has to be kept and honored. And if that's the case, ask the Minchas Chinuch, why would this pasuk not also be referring to a situation where you have a blind person and you cause him to stumble? Okay, that's the question we're going to start off with. The Malbim explains how even on a simple level, the pasuk is not at all referring to a blind person walking down the road and you're sticking that log in front of him. How do we know, even if you read this pasuk literally, it's not referring to an actual blind person and you cause him to trip? Says the Malbim, because the Torah uses a lashon of sitain, lifnei iver lo sitain milchshal. What does the word sitain mean? Don't give him. It refers to something you're giving him. If it would mean don't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person, it should say lifnei iver lo sasim, don't place. The Torah implies this is not something you're placing, rather this is something you're giving. So what do you mean? You go over to a blind man, you give him your banana peels? What does that have to do with causing him to trip? It must be, says the Malbim, the literal interpretation of the pasuk has nothing at all to do with causing a blind man to stumble, because it says to give, lo sitain, doesn't say to place. Additionally, we're familiar with the concept that whenever the Torah says fear God, it's referring to a situation where no human being could possibly know that you're doing something wrong. Only Hashem can know you're doing something wrong, and the Torah says even though nobody is looking and nobody could hear and nobody could see, fear God. In other words, if we're referring to a case where a blind man's walking down the road and the Torah is saying don't put a stumbling block in front of him, there would be no need for the Torah to say fear God. The Torah could say fear man. Who knows? Maybe people are watching. The fact that the Torah has to say fear God, that clearly means we're referring to a situation where no human being could possibly know what you're doing and what your thoughts and intentions are. And the Torah is saying, even though I'm warning you not to do this, you may think nobody will catch you. No! You have to fear God. So therefore, the Mefarshim explain, this is specifically referring to a case where no one could possibly know you're doing something wrong. What's that? Where you're giving your friend bad advice. And you could always make the claim, well, I misunderstood the conversation and that's why I gave him the bad advice. Or, I really thought the real estate market would boom. But Hashem knows what your true intentions were, and therefore the Torah says, fear God. Okay? So even on the simple level, when the Torah says, it's not referring to, the poor guy, the blind guy walking down the street. It's referring to someone who needs your advice, and you advise him wrongfully. Okay. That's part A of the shir, and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything we're about to discuss. Part B. The Gemara Masechta Avodah Zarah understands that the pasuk with Neiver Loisitei Milshal is referring to something else entirely. Says the Gemara, very important Gemara. Look at number 5. The Hatanya, the Gemara tells us in Masechta Avodah Zarah, we learned in a Brisa, Amar Rav Nasan, Minayin shelo yoshid adam koshel yayin lenazir. How do we know one is not allowed to pass a cup of wine to a nazir? Here you have a guy, he took a vow, he's not going to drink wine, he's not going to take a haircut, right? He's a full-fledged nazir. And he's sitting there, he's chalashing for wine. You could just tell this guy has alcohol withdrawal. You know he needs a cup of wine. And you happen to have in your back pocket a bottle of wine, and the nazir says, please give me the wine. Or you have a guy, we know goyim are not permitted to eat Ever Menachai, the flesh, the limbs of a living creature. And the guy, he sees a chicken walking down the street, he wants to bite right into it, and he says, give me the chicken! Says the Gemara, how do we know you're not allowed to give the nazir the wine? How do we know you're not allowed to give the guy the Ever Menachai? Talmud Lomar, therefore the Torah tells us, V'lefnei Iver lo sitein milchal. Do not cause a blind man to stumble. In other words, if you enable and facilitate someone to do an avera, if you provide someone with the opportunity to sin, you are violating the lav and the Torah. Lefnei Iver lo sitein milchal. In fact, the Chavetz Chaim tells us, when you speak lashon hara to someone, besides the avera of lashon hara, you're actually violating lefnei Iver lo sitein milchal, because you're causing him to hear lashon hara, which is also a sin.
This applies for Goy?
Yeah, because goyim are not allowed to eat Ever Menachai. It's one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach.
How are we responsible for a Goy?
We're responsible to make sure goyim do what they need to do. In other words, for us to cause a guy to sin, whatever is considered a sin for him would be considered a lav. It's also a major topic. Major topic in and of itself. Okay, so what the Gemara is telling us is that for us to cause another person to sin, you're violating lefnei iver lo sitein milchal. So now the Gemara asks the obvious question. I'm not causing him to sin. The bottle is sitting 3 feet away from the nazir. He could easily get up and get the bottle himself. The guy sees the chicken walking down the street. He could easily take the chicken and eat it himself. What am I doing? I'm just helping him out. I'm just passing him the wine. And I'm over lefnei iver lo sitein milchal. He could do it without me. Ask the Gemara. In this case, the if I don't give it to him shakli, he's going to take it. Now I'm going to violate lefnei iver. What am I doing wrong? The nazir could get up and get the wine himself. So I made it easier for him. And I'm over lefnei iver. Says the Gemara, the key to the whole shir. You got to get this. You know what we're talking about? Dekai betray Ivri Nahara, where you're standing on 2 sides of the river. Says the Gemara, The only situation where you violate lifnei iver l'siten milchsha, when you cause someone to sin, is only if they could not sin without you. The Nazir is on one side of the Hudson River. You're on the other side of the Hudson River. There are no wine stores on his side for whatever reason. They're all closed today. It's Sunday. They're supposed to be closed. And you have the only bottle of wine in the entire New York State. And he says, my dear friend, you Jew over there, pass me the wine. And you happen to be a pitcher for the New York Yankees. You're a Jewish pitcher. And you're going to toss him the wine. Says the Gemara, you're over lefnei iver le'siten milchsha. Why? Because he could not have gotten the wine without you. Or, the guy is on the other side of the river. He says, throw me the chicken. So you toss him the chicken. There are no chickens on his side of the river. Without you, he couldn't have sinned. You violate lefnei iver le'siten milchsha. However, the Gemara is clearly saying that if he's on the same side of the river as you, and he asks you pass the wine, and he could have easily gotten up and gotten him himself, you do not violate lefnei iver le'siten milchsha. The violation of lefnei iver le'siten milchsha is only he couldn't have done it without you, right? I'm so glad to have you as a friend. I couldn't have sinned without you. Yes?
What if he buys it from you and you know you're not allowed to give it to him?
Okay, so we're going to deal with those types of situations. We have a lot to discuss. Yes?
What if there's more people on the other side of the aisle with you? Can't other people do it? If you can't do it himself, you can ask somebody else next to you.
So if somebody else could have easily thrown it to him, the concept of two sides of the river means he couldn't have gotten it without you. Okay. So here's the question we have to raise. We're going to discuss a number of issues that are relevant to Kiruv Rechokim Bizman Hazeh, nowadays. I'll give you some illustrations. Very often people want to invite unobservant, irreligious Jews to their home on Shabbos. The only thing is, you know that if you invite them to your house on Shabbos, they're going to drive home. They're going to drive home. Driving, in most cases, is an Isser D'Oraisa. Many different Isurim involved. What?
Why do you say in more cases? You're allowed to drive some cases?
Well, we're going to have to stick strictly to the material at hand. Is one allowed to invite someone to their home on Shabbos if you know 100% they're going to drive home? On the one hand, Rabbi said we can't have any side discussions. We'll wait till after. On the one hand, you can make the case that, look, if you tell the guy, I have an apartment for you, and if you come over to my house, I'll let you stay in my apartment, and there's a reasonable chance he's going to stay over and he's not going to drive, okay, we have nothing to talk about. It's permitted. You're not enabling him to sin. It's very possible he won't sin. However, what if you know 100% by you inviting him to your house on Shabbos, he is going to drive? Or another situation. You invite someone to your house for Shabbos, and you know, no matter how much you ask him, no matter how much you beg him, please wash your hands for Natilas Yadayim. Please make a bracha on the food. He's going to say, look, I respect you, I respect Jews, I'm a Jew myself. That's your thing, this is my thing. I will not make a bracha. Are you allowed to feed him food if you know he's not going to wash Natilas Yadayim? I'll just point out, the Shulchan Aruch writes clearly in Siman Kuf Samach Tes, one is prohibited to give food to someone who will not make a bracha on it. That is the open halacha, and it would seem to be an open and shut case. That's what the Shulchan Aruch writes. One is not allowed to give food, and we'll see, it's all the way at the end. The Shulchan Aruch writes in number 21, Asher litain lo prusas pas elam ken yodeh b'shenat al yadav. You're not allowed to give bread to someone if you know they're not going to wash their hands. If you think maybe 25% they'll wash their hands, okay, I'm not doing anything wrong. If you know they're not going to wash your hands, you're not allowed to. Says the Shulchan Aruch further, Lo yitain lechol ela l'misha yodeh b'shiyavayich. You're only allowed to give food to someone who you know is going to make a bracha. If even, now there are a lot of ways around it. You could tell them, look, you don't want to make a bracha? I'll make the bracha, you just say Amen. So in most cases, the guy will say, okay, whatever you want, whatever you want. You want me to wash my hands? I'll wash my hands. You want me to stand on my head? Whatever you want, right? But what if you have a stubborn guy, and you know he wants to come to your house, but he's not going to listen to you? Are you allowed to feed him? The simple halacha states, no, you're not allowed to. And the prohibition that we're dealing with is, lifnei iver lo sitein milchsha. You're causing someone to sin. Either you're causing him not to wash his hands, you're causing him not to make a bracha. And we would like to analyze the case, is one allowed to invite someone to their house on Shabbos if you know they are going to drive? Okay. Let's go back to the Gemara. The Gemara said very clearly that to pass wine to a Nazir, where he cannot get it without you, is a lav in the Torah l'fnei iver lo tzitein machshel. But what if you're standing on the same side of the river as the Nazir, where he could easily get the wine himself, or the guy could get the Ever Menachai himself? What does the Gemara tell us? The Gemara tells us nothing at all. All the Gemara tells us is, you are not violating l'fnei iver lo tzitein machshel. In other words, if you have a Nazir, and he says, pass the wine, and he says, no, you're not going to pass it, he's going to get up and get the wine himself, says the Gemara, you do not violate l'fnei iver lo tzitein machshel. Maybe though, is it possible to say, although you don't violate a biblical prohibition, maybe you still violate a rabbinic prohibition, which is called misayea lidei ovrei avera. You're assisting others to do an avera. In other words, you're not. It's possible he would sin without you, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, when he's sinning, it is impossible. You're assisting him to sin. In other words, you're passing the wine to the Nazir. He could have gotten it without you, but are you allowed to facilitate and enable and help him sin in a way where he would have sinned without you? And that's really our question about, could you invite people to your home on Shabbos? Look, anyone who's driving home from your house on a Shabbos night, whether you invite him or you don't invite him, he's going to be driving anyway, right? If he's not driving home from your house, he's going to be driving to the movies. He's going to be driving who knows where. So you're not going to say, because you invited him, he's driving. Right? This is not analogous to the case of a Nazir who cannot get wine without you. You're not making him drive. He's going to drive without you. He's going to be turning on lights without you. If anything, by him coming to your house, he's going to be violating Shabbos a lot less than if he would be at home. So that's the question. Is there any problem of enabling someone to do an Avera where they would do it anyway, but at the end of the day, you're assisting them? Okay. So for this, we have a Machlokas Rishonim. The Mordechai in Masechta Avodah Zarah says the following. In number 7, the Mordechai tells us, in the name of the Avi HaEzri,
What number?
number 7, are you allowed to sell clothing to Goyim if you know they are going to use those clothing for idolatry? Right? You know, a priest walks into your house, and you know you're selling a certain type of shirt, that to wear that shirt, either you're a priest or you're a nurse in the hospital, let's say, or you're a doctor in the hospital. And you know this guy, he's buying the shirt for idolatry. You know 100%, right? He comes in, he flashes his clergy card, he's telling you, I need this shirt because I want to serve my yashkas wearing this shirt. Are you allowed to sell it to him?
Yeah.
Says the Mordechai, it depends. If you're the only store in town, and he could not get a shirt without you, so this is Lifnei Iver, he can't sin without you. But says the Mordechai, what if you are a storekeeper on a block where every single store sells these type of clothing? And if he's not going to go to your store, he's going to go next door. And he could buy the shirt in any store in the world. Says the Mordechai, it is absolutely permitted to sell him the shirt. You know why? Because he would do the Avera without you. In other words, the Mordechai is of the opinion that although at the end of the day I am assisting this priest in buying his clothing for idolatry, nevertheless, since he could do it without me, it's permitted to sell it to him. So if you would ask the Mordechai, can you invite someone to your home on a Friday night if they'd be driving anyway, but now that you're inviting them, you are enabling them to drive home, what would the Mordechai say? Mutter. Mutar. 100% mutter according to the opinion of the Mordechai. Although I'm assisting, but he's going to drive anyway. Tosfos in Masechta Shabbos disagrees. Tosfos in Masechta Shabbos is talking about the following case. We know the first Mishnah of Masechta Shabbos talks about the Balabayas who's standing inside and the Ani who's standing outside. And we know there's a malacha on Shabbos called Haitzah, carrying. In Queens, not too many people know about that malacha because we have an Erev. But in some countries, like in Brooklyn, where they don't have an Erev, right, there's a malacha called Haitzah. You know how to carry on Shabbos. The definition of Haitzah is you need to do three things. You need to pick it up in Rishus Harabim. You need to transfer it to Rishus Hayachid and put it down in Rishus Hayachid. Okay? You need Akira, pick it up, transfer the Rishus Hanacha. The Mishnah says the following: what if a balabayis takes a loaf of bread, picks it up from his table inside, puts it on the ani's hand? The balabayis is chayiv, right? He violated Shabbos. He did the akira, he picked it up, he transferred the rishus, he put it down. Says the Mishnah, the ani, however, his hands are open. Is he doing anything wrong? He's not doing anything wrong. He's off the hook. Ask Tosfos, why is he off the hook? The ani is oiver lefnei iver loisitein mechshal, because if not for the hands of the ani, the balabais would have nothing to put his bread down on. So therefore, ask Tosfos, why is the ani off the hook? He is facilitating the balabais to violate carrying. Says Tosfos, what are you talking about? Come on. If not for the hands of the ani, the balabais could just put it down on the floor. So the ani is not doing anything. Says Tosfos, the ani is still doing something wrong.
He wouldn't be there. I mean, if he wouldn't be there, there wouldn't be anybody to give it to him.
Okay, no, but even, let's say he is there. Let's say the ani would say, look, I don't want anything to do with this, just put it down on the floor. So the balabayas would still be violating Shabbos without the ani. So what's the ani doing? Tosfos sets forth the following principle. Tosfos' opinion is that even though the person could sin without you, if you are at all involved in facilitating the sin, you violate an Isser D'Rabbanan called Misayea Lidei Oivrei Avera. You're assisting. What do you mean he could do it without me? Doesn't matter if he could do it without me. If I'm involved, I'm making it easier. He would have to put it down an extra 2 feet, bend down an extra foot. And I'm preventing him, I'm saving him that extra exertion. Says Tosfos, this is what we call Misayea Lidei Oivrei Avera, which is an Isser D'Rabbanan. Where does this Isser D'Rabbanan stem from? Says the Rosh, it stems from the following. Since I am required at all times to make sure that every Jew is following the Torah, if I am allowing him to put the bread down on my hands, and I'm not trying to persuade him not to, that's considered an assistance. It's a compliance with what he's doing. If I'm complying with what he's doing, that's considered what we call Misayea Lidei Oivrei Avera. And although he could have sinned without me, this is an Isser D'Rabbanan. So if you were to ask Tosfos, are you allowed to invite someone to your home if you know they're going to drive home? What would Tosfos say? No. It's an Isser D'Rabbanan. Even though this person's going to drive without you, nevertheless, you are enabling them, you are involved in their malacha, and this is what is called Misayea Lidei Oivrei Avera. Okay? So if we were to end the shir right now, and with the following question, are you allowed to invite someone to your home? We would say it's a machlokes, the Mordechai and Tosfos. The Mordechai says, mutter. Tosfos says, it's aser midrabanan. Again, if we're talking about a guy, he never ever drives out on Friday night, he stays home and he sleeps, and it's only because of you he's going to take the car out, everyone would agree, this is an Isser D'Oraisa, Lifnei Iver Loisitein Mechshal, you're causing him to sin. Our question is, he's going to drive anyway. In most cases, the guy's going to drive anyway. Are you allowed to facilitate and be involved in his sin? It's machlokes rishonim. How do we paskin? Now this is very important. How do we paskin? Look at number 10, the Ramah. The Ramah tells us, Yesh Oimrim. Okay, you have to read the words very carefully. There are those who say, Ha de'aser limkar lohem dvarim hashayachim la'avoidasa. That which it's prohibited to sell a non-Jew, a guy, something which is relevant to their service of idolatry. Hainu dafka me'en lohem acherim kayotzeba. That's only if they could not get it elsewhere. Or they couldn't go anywhere to get it. A guy who is able to buy the same article somewhere else, mutter limkar lahem kol davar. You could sell them anything. Whose opinion is that? The Mordechai. The Ramah is saying that it's only prohibited to sell a guy something that he's going to use for Avodah Zarah. If he couldn't get it elsewhere, if he could get it anywhere else, it's permitted. That is the opinion of the Mordechai. The Ramah goes further, the Yesh Machmirin. There are those who are strict. Whose opinion is that? Tosfos. What do? V'noagu lahakel kisvara rishayna. We are lenient like the first svara. Like who? The Mordechai. Okay, so the Ramah is saying the minhag is to be lenient. So if you would ask the Ramah, what is the minhag regarding inviting people to your home on Shabbos? We're no hig that it's mutter. However, the Ramah concludes, V'chol bal nefesh yachmer la'asmai. If you're a sensitive person, if you're someone who is in touch with the ideals of the Torah, stay away. If I were to ask you, if the Ramah would walk in right now, and we would pin him down, Ramah, who do you feel, which Rishon is more in accordance with the halacha? What do you think the Ramah would say? The Mordechai. Right? Me'ikar adin. The Ramah is definitely leaning towards the opinion of the Mordechai. Tosos is a chumrah. Right? You don't have to keep every chumrah. Not every time it says Bal Nefesh Yachmir, that means we have to be machmir. That's if you feel you're on the madrega to be machmir. The Ramah is certainly leaning towards the Mordechai. And in fact, the Shalos Teshuvos Chavos Yair is medayik something that I never knew before. This is a skill in reading a Ramah. When the Ramah brings down the opinion of Tosfos, what does the Ramah say? V'yesh machmirin. There are those who are strict. Ask the Chavos Yair, Tosfos is not machmir. Tosfos will say it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. That's not a chumrah. The fact that the Ramah labels the opinion of Tosfos yesh machmirin definitely indicates the Ramah feels that's not me'ikar hadin. Okay? So halacha l'maisa, if you would ask the Ramah, look, I have this relative that I really have to invite for Shabbos, and if I don't invite him, he's going to be upset at me, and he's going to call my mother, and he's going to harangue her, and it's going to destroy the family. Can I invite him? The Ramah would say, of course. So, right, if we would end the shir now, can Ashkenazim invite someone for Shabbos? Yes, we don't know about the Sfardim yet, right? This is the Ramah. We don't know about this. Is what okay. The Shulchan Aruch, however, has a different opinion. The Shulchan Aruch paskins like Tosfos. Shulchan Aruch paskins like Tosfos. If you look in number 12, Shulchan Aruch writes very clearly. Unfortunately, I missed the key lines here. It's a little bit further on. The Shulchan Aruch says like this: if you're a balabayas and you want to stick bread into the hands of the ani sitting there just with his hands open says Shulchan Aruch is doing an Isser D'Rabbanan of Misayeh Lidei Ovrei Avera. The Shulchan Aruch paskins like Tosfos that it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. The Magen Avram paskins like Tosfos, not like the Ramah. So at the end of the day, if we would end the shir right here, if you would want to know, could you invite someone to your house on Shabbos if you know they're going to drive? Not really, no. The Ramah is Mekel, and usually Ashkenazim, we follow the Ramah, but here the Magen Avram and the Shulchan Aruch are machmer. And even the Ramah says it's a good thing to be machmer. So we would be very hard pressed to say you could do it at this point in the shir.
How do you know? He just explains the Shulchan Aruch.
How do I know? Okay, good point. Because the Magen Avram could have just stopped by after he says Aval also because of Fnei Iver. Then he has to add in, and let's say he could have done it without you. You're over Messiah. That's not what the Shulchan Aruch said. That's what the Pais can bring that down. The Rav Moshe and the Tshuva, if you look in Yardei Chilek Aleph Siman Ayin Beis, he brings out from them this Magen Avram that I had your question. How is it so clear in the Magen Avram? But he definitely feels that this Magen Avram is paskening like Tosfos.
And what Mishnah Berurah says about it?
Well, let's see. Okay. So again, the Mordechai says mutter. Tosfos says aser. Ramah sides with the Mordechai. The Magen Avram and Shulchan Aruch side with Tosfos. Comes the Shach and he revolutionizes the entire world. He turns the whole sugya upside down. Okay? The Shach says, the Mordechai says mutter. Tosfos says Isser D'Rabbanan. The Shach said Ramah, you missed the boat. There's no machlekes over here. Everyone agrees. How's that possible? You got to know what we're talking about. It depends if we're dealing with a Jew or a guy. The Mordechai Masechta Avodah Zarah who says that if the guy could buy his priest shirt in a different store, it's absolutely permitted to sell it to him. He's talking about a guy who would be able to sin without you. You're not allowed to be the direct cause of him sinning, where if he couldn't sin without you, you're not allowed to give him the article of sin because that's of naiva. But where he could get the garment without you, there is no prohibition of assisting. However, the Taisus, who in Masechta Shabbos says the ani is not allowed to sit there with his arms open accepting the bread, that's because the ani is a from a Yid, he's Jewish. A Jew is not allowed to facilitate anyone to sin, even if they would do it anyway. That's the chilek. Jew and guy. Says the Shach. It's no machlokes between the Mordechai and Taisus. If it's a Jew, it's prohibited. If it's a guy, it's mutter. If you were to ask the Shach at this point, can you invite the Jew to your home on a Friday night to drive home? No. But the Shach doesn't hold it over there. The Shach adds 1 point. Shach says, what's the difference between a Jew and a guy? There's no difference in this area. In other words, if a guy is not allowed to sin, then you can't contribute. And there should be no logical difference between the prohibition of helping a Jew and helping a guy. Says the Shach, the difference is not Jew and guy. Some Jews will fall under the category of Goyim, says the Shach. A Jew who's a Mumar, a Jew who's not Shomrei Torah Mitzvahs, you're allowed to assist them to sin. A from Jew, you can't assist them to sin. But what's the reason, the Shach says, why you're allowed to assist a guy to sin? Because Goyim don't care. If the guy says, give me the Ever Menachai, he's bemazed sinning, says the Shach, and this is how the Noda B'Yehuda explains the Shach. If the guy is intentionally sinning, you're not required to stop him. So too, if you know a Jew is intentionally sinning, you're not required to stop him. Okay, you hear the difference? It's not the distinction is not Jew, guy. The distinction is shoygeg and mazed. Someone who doesn't really know that this is not permitted, so you have to try to stop them. But someone who knows, you're not how to drive on Shabbos. He may not keep it, but he knows you're not how to drive on Shabbos. It is permitted to assist them to sin according to the Shach, where they would sin anyway. So now, if you would ask the Shach, is it permitted to invite someone to your home if you know they're going to drive home? Absolutely yes. If you ask the Ramah would say, you should be machmer. If you ask the Magen Avram would say no. Who do we paskin like? The Shach who says mutter, or the Magen Avram who says you cannot assist? We paskin like the Shach.
It still depends on how ignorant the person is.
If the guy was born in Timbuktu and he never heard of Shabbos, but somebody in New York, even if he's a Tinok Shenishba, the poskim say, he knows you know how to drive on Shabbos. He just disagrees with that. So, Tinok Shenishba even does not play a role in this. And in fact, Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in number 17 regarding the machlokes, the Shach against the Magen Avram, we follow the Shach against the Ramah and against the Magen Avram. And again, the opinion of the Shach is, although you're not allowed to be the absolute cause of someone else sinning, and where they couldn't do it without you, but if they could have sinned without you, if they're intentionally sinning, you're allowed to assist them. And that is why, says Rav Moshe Feinstein, in the following case, let's say you own a catering hall, and you get a phone call from a couple, and they say, we want to rent out your hall. And no problem, just use a kosher caterer. By the way, we're going to have mixed dancing. Yeah, mixed dancing, which is Isser D'Oraisa. Says Rav Moshe, are you allowed to rent out the catering hall to them? You're causing them to sin. If you close, now you'll say, what do you mean? I'm not causing them to sin. If not for me, they'll go down the block and they'll rent out a different catering hall. You're right.
Not kosher.
No, 1 second. You're right. But still, I'm the one renting it to them, so it should at least be what we call Misayeh Lidei Avera, where according to Taisus, it should be prohibited. Because I'm providing them the opportunity to sin, even though they would sin without me. Says Rav Moshe, it's mutter. Because we paskin like the Shach. People who want to sin intentionally, you're not prohibited from assisting them to sin. Says Rav Moshe. But even according, okay? So right now, this is one possible leniency to be allowed to invite someone to your house on Shabbos if they're going to drive. Because they would drive without you, and if they would drive without you, and they're doing it intentionally, you could assist them. By the way, Rav Moshe adds, even according to the Magen Avram would allow you to rent out the catering hall to someone who would have mixed dancing. Why? Says Rav Moshe, another leniency that we could apply to this scenario. And that is, What's going to happen if you don't rent out the hall to them? So they're going to call up the treif catering hall, and they're going to get married in a place, and instead of serving chapanash or meal mart, they're going to serve, or Carlos and Gabby, sorry, they're going to serve Burger King caterers, right? So says Rav Moshe, think about the scenario. You're going to tell me that I'm causing them to sin by renting out the catering hall? No. I'm being machshel them? Just the opposite. I'm saving them from sin. I'm saving them from sin. So says Rav Moshe, even the Magen Avram would agree in this case I could rent out the catering hall. Based on that logic, we could make the same argument and say that to invite someone to your home on a Friday night, what do you want to say? Well, Tosfos would say you're not allowed to do it because you're assisting them to sin. Okay. But what are they going to do if they don't come to your home? Either they're going to drive to who knows where, or they're going to be sitting at home clicking the remote. Every time they click the remote and that light goes off, it's another Issa D'Oraisa. So they've changed the channel 5,000 times. That's 5,000 times. So you're going to... What?
If it's not fire.
If it's not a fire remote? All right, then my joke doesn't work, right? But says in most scenarios, if they're going to come to your home on Shabbos, the only thing wrong they're going to do is drive home. But if they're going to stay, would do whatever they would ordinarily do, they would probably end up doing much worse Yisurim. So we're not going to call this, I'm being machshel them. No, I'm stopping them. I'm preventing them from sin. That would be another rationalization. I'm calling it a rationalization to be able to invite someone to your home if you know they're going to drive. A third approach. And this is the approach of the Ksav Sofer. Okay, you ready for this? Remember, we have the opinion of the Mordechai, who in Masechta Avodah Zarah says that one may sell garments to Goyim if you know they're going to use it for Avodah Zarah. Permitted. And on the other hand, we have the opinion of Tosfos, who says that the Ani who's sitting there and you're going to put something in his hand, even though he's not involved at all, but he's facilitating, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. And the Shach wanted to say there's no machlokes. Says the Ksav Sofer, this is my favorite part of the shir, by the way. Why did the Shach want to say that there's no machlokes between the Mordechai and Tosfos? Because everybody knows the Shach was a kohen. And what do kohanim do? Oyev shalom, v'roidev shalom. Right? They love to make peace. So the Shach couldn't stomach the fact that there's a machlokes over here between the Mordechai and Tosfos, that the Mordechai says it's mutter, and Tosfos says it's Nesser D'Rabbanan. So the Shach wanted to be a good kohen, so he said everyone agrees, Shalom Yisrael. The Mordechai is talking about Goyim, and the Tosfos is talking about Jews. Ksav Sofer says, that's his opinion. I have a different way to make peace between the Mordechai and Tosfos. Listen to this. The Mordechai that says you're not allowed to facilitate someone to sin even though they would sin anyway what? The Mordechai who says you're allowed to facilitate someone to sin even though they would sin anyway. You know what the case was? The guy says, sell me a jacket, sell me a shirt. So you say, what are you going to do with it? I'm going to take it and serve idols with it. Is he doing anything wrong at the time that he's buying it? No. But you know he's going to do something wrong. Nah, that's not called assistance. Am I assisting him with any sin? No, he's just buying it. But you know what he's going to do with it. That's not my problem. I know what he's going to do with it. Right now, I'm not assisting him to sin. I'm providing him the opportunity to sin, but I'm not assisting him to sin. In that case, there's no prohibition of assistance. Tosfos is talking about the Ani sticking out his hands. When that Ani sticks out his hands, at the moment he's sticking out his hands, he's assisting someone to sin. That's when there's an Isser of Messiah Lida every Avera. It's only prohibited to help someone sin where they would have sinned anyway if you're involved in the sin. If you're merely providing them the opportunity and the framework with which to take that and go sin, permitted. So if you ask the Ksav Sofer, can you invite someone to your home on a Friday night if you know they're going to drive? On the way home? Anyone brave enough to say what they think?
No.
Of course, it's mutter. It's mutter. Of course it's mutter. When I'm assisting them, what am I doing? I'm assisting them in the sin? No. I'm merely extending them an invitation. That is providing them with the opportunity to take that invitation and then drive home. The same way that, by the way, the Ksav Sofer is talking about the following case. Someone asked him, They own a storefront, let's say, in somewhere, and a barber wants to rent out the storefront, but you know the barber is going to work on Shabbos. Are you allowed to rent the storefront to him if you know he's going to work on Shabbos? Says the Ksav Sofer, of course. Because even though he could rent, first of all, he could rent it from anyone. But what do you mean? According to Tosfos, I'm assisting him? I'm not assisting him. He's not sinning the moment he rents out the store. The store merely affords him the opportunity and provides him the space with which to work.
Here you say you come tonight.
I'm saying come tonight. So that's all the assistance I'm giving him. Is that assistance at all involved in the sin? No. That assistance puts him in the opportunity with which you know he will sin. So that's another possible heter to invite someone to your home on a Friday night. And finally, number 4, again, so far we had 3 possible heterim. The shach, which says you're allowed to assist someone to sin if they're sinning intentionally. Number 2, we had the heter of Rav Moshe, that your assistance, it's not causing them to sin. If anything, it's preventing them from sinning worse. It's permitted. You have the heter of the Ksav Sofer. The Ksav Sofer says it's only prohibited to assist someone to sin if the assistance is involved in the sin itself, not if it's merely providing them the opportunity to sin. Says the Marsham, listen to this. It is only prohibited to assist someone to sin if you are giving them the item with which they're sinning with. For example, you have a nazir. He says, pass the wine. He could get it himself. But by you passing him the wine, you are giving him the chayfetz, the article with which he's sinning. Or, if let's say you know someone is a barber and he's going to take a haircut on Shabbos, and he wants to buy the scissors from you, you can't sell him the scissors. But in this situation, says the Marsham, in the case where you want to rent out the storefront to the barber, I'm not giving him the scissors, I'm giving him the airspace in which to do the Avera. Says the Marsham, you know what that would be like? If the Nazir says, pass the wine, I can't pass the wine to him. But if the Nazir says, kindly pick me up and bring me to the wine, it's mutter. Because you're not bringing the article to the person, you're just merely allowing the person to sin.
Bringing the person to the article, so
it's different.
What if you put it in front of you?
If she says pass it, that's assisting.
You take the bottle in front of you, okay, do that.
No, that's the same thing. That's the same thing. Huh?
If I move him and move the bottle, same thing. That's semantics. Sorry, that's semantics. If I take the bottle and put it in front of you.
Right. That's not the lav. The Torah says, I
didn't pass it to him. I put it in front of him.
That's called passing. That's called passing to him.
Lift him up.
If you're passing like Shah,
Yeah.
you're judging the person favorably. You think that this person is Shah, and he's going to sin, and you're not even giving him benefit of the doubt. You're not giving him...
What about a case where you know?
No, what do you mean you're judging him favorably? Is he driving intentionally? He knows, right? He knows that Orthodox Jews don't drive. So he's driving intentionally. What's he going to say? He doesn't. That's considered a...
What's the actual difference between bringing the person...
Again, let's say it a little bit differently. Let's say it like this. In the situation where you're renting him the storefront, you're not giving him the article with which he's sinning. You're merely providing him with the arena in which to sin. That's permitted. Even though, what do you mean? Either way, I can't assist someone to sin. No. The prohibition, says the Marsham, is only in a situation where you're bringing the article of Isser to the person. If you ask the Marsham, can you invite someone to your home on a Friday night if you know they're going to drive home? What would the Marsham say? Absolutely permitted, just don't give him the car. If you gave him the car, the guy, right? If the guy says, "Give me the car keys," so now you're providing him with the article with which you're doing the avera. But if you're merely providing him with the opportunity to do the avera, it would be permitted. Okay? These are 4 heterim that are brought down in the Paiskim to allow one to invite someone to their home on a Friday night. And we'll just say one more from Rav Moshe Sternbuch. He says the following. This is also a very interesting idea. And that is, what is the lav of lifnei iver lo sitein machshal? The Torah says, don't cause your friend to stumble and be harmed physically or spiritually. But if I'm inviting you to my house on Shabbos with the intention of bringing you closer to the Torah and trying to be makar of you, and I'm doing it for your benefit, can we say I'm causing you to stumble? Or just the opposite, I'm benefiting you? Says Rav Shtermuch, this is not considered Lifnei Iver Leisitein Milchshal, even perhaps if he would normally stay home and not drive. Now this is very important. Rav Shtermuch says, but it's a chil Hashem for him to park in front of your house. Tell him to park 2 blocks down, and that will take care of the problem. Okay?
You're allowed to tell him to do things on Shabbat?
No, I'm not telling him. I'm telling you, please don't drive home. But you know he will.
No, but Sam, you're allowed to tell him what to park on Shabbat?
Now, you're telling him don't park in front of my house. Okay, so these are 5 heterim that the Paiskeis Manenu give in order to allow someone to invite to their home on a Friday night. However, Rav Moshe Feinstein seems to have paskin that it is absolutely forbidden. It's asur. What's the isur? So most people are familiar with Rav Moshe's opinion, but they're not familiar why Rav Moshe says it's prohibited. Says Rav Moshe, you know why it's asur? Forget about Misayeli de Over Avera. Forget about Lifnei Iver Leisitein Milchshal. Says Rav Moshe, you're like the snake. You're a snake. What does that mean, you're a snake? We know that when Adam Harishon sinned, God says, Adam, why'd you sin? So Adam had a chance to give his defense. So Adam said, she made me do it. So Hashem went to Chava and said, why'd you do it? They're not, okay. Why didn't Hashem ever ask the Nachash, why'd you sin? The answer is, says the Gemara Sanhedrin, take a look, this is a Tshuva Rav Moshe, in number 18. Excuse me. In number 26, says Rav Moshe, the Gemara says, Ein tayanin lamesis. There are no excuses for the seducer. If you seduce someone to sin, whether you have an excuse, you don't have an excuse, we don't care. We're not even going to be interested in the excuse. There is no avera in the Torah worse than causing someone else to sin, where you've persuaded them to sin. So Rav Moshe says, what do you mean? What does this have to do with inviting someone to your home on Shabbos? The Isser of Mesis is only an Isser of causing someone and seducing them to serve idols. Not any other sin, says Rav Moshe. The Gemara, that talks about the Isser of Mesis, there's an Isser Skila if you persuade someone to serve idols. But if you persuade someone to do any other sin, you're a Mesis. You're the seducer, you're the snake. So to call someone up and say, it would mean so much to me. I'd be so honored by your presence at my home on Shabbos. Says Rav Moshe, you're like the snake who convinced Adam and Chava to eat from the Eitz Hadas. It's one thing someone comes to you and says, can I buy your shirt? And maybe they couldn't have gotten it anywhere. So you sell it to them, Lifnei Iver Leisitein Milchshal. But here, you called the guy on the telephone, you extended him the invitation, and you told him how much you want him to come. You are a seducer. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein, this is not Misayeli de Over Avera, this is not Lifnei Iver Leisitein Milchshal, this is a seducer. Says Rav Moshe, if there's a chance he's going to stay over, okay, so you're not seducing him. But if you know 100% that by extending the offer to him, he's going to drive home, it is absolutely prohibited, not an Isser D'Rabbanan, not just an Isser D'Oraisa. This is the worst Avera in the Torah. Okay? Very interesting. So, first of all, I just want to say this shir is halacha v'lo l'maisa. I'm not saying any definitive psak, not telling you what to do. If the question ever arises, ask your local Orthodox rabbi. I'm merely presenting to you the various nuances of the prohibition of Misayel de Over Avera, Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Milchshal. Okay. We'll end with one added possible reason. What?
We do it or we cannot do it?
It's a case-by-case basis. I'm not going to give a definitive answer. What? No, because Rav Moshe is not saying a Baal Nefesh should be machmer. Rav Moshe says if you do it, you're the Nachash. No one, it doesn't matter. Okay, we'll end off with one final point, which is very interesting, and we'll hold it here. One added possible reason to be Mekel is the reason of the Tzitz Eliezer. He says something very interesting. He was posed with the following question. You own a store, you own a convenience store. Are you allowed to sell cigarettes? Or, says the Tzitz Eliezer, we know the Surgeon General tells us about the dangers of cigarettes. The Tzitz Eliezer comes out very strongly against smoking. It's an Isser Dairaisa, he says, and if the only thing you learned was that it's an Isser Dairaisa to smoke, it was Kedai to come in. But that's what the Tzitz Eliezer says. So now, am I allowed to sell cigarettes to someone?
Yes.
Says the Tzitz Eliezer, it depends if they're a man or a woman. What? Says the Tzitz Eliezer, if I'm selling someone cigarettes, you could buy cigarettes anywhere. So this is not an Isser of L'fnei Iver L'sita Nosho. It's an Isser of Misayeh Lidei Ovrei Avera. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, Misayeh Lidei Ovrei Avera is... Where does that stem from? That stems from Arvus, from my responsibility to another Jew. Says the Chassam Sofer in the Tshuva, Arvus only applies to men and not to women. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, the entire Isser of Misayeh Lidei Ovrei Avera would only be to men and not to women. And therefore many poskim say, if you're going to invite, it was more permitted to invite a woman than to invite a man, and vice versa.
What's the logic behind it?
The Torah only required responsibility. We're only responsible for other men. That obligation was only devolves on men.
It's only between men?
According to the Sam Sofer, yeah, and that's a halachically accepted opinion. I'm just throwing it out. This is just for your thought. So the Tzitz Eliezer says, even if you want to say you can't sell cigarettes to men, it would be permitted to sell cigarettes to women. Okay, I'm not recommending that, and it would come out that there would be an added svara to allow, if you're going to invite, so I'm not allowing, and I'm not saying you can, again, Ramesh says also, but according to the Matirim, there would be an added reason to be able to invite a woman. Okay, we'll hold it over here. Rabbi, thanks for coming. Thank you for listening.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.